Hi and welcome back to another video. Today we are talking about how to set up data capture forms in Microsoft Excel, how to add multiple drop-down menus, and then feed that data back into your Excel sheet. This will be a lengthy video, more so than some of the other ones that I've created. So what I'm going to do is drop down a lot of timestamps in the description that will help you jump to the parts that are more relevant to what you're looking for. So if you do find this video useful, please hit the like button and subscribe to stay up to date with other tutorial videos that I'll be coming up with in the future. And with that said, let's crack on. So the first thing that you're going to need to do is to activate the Developer tab at the top of the ribbon. To do that, you would go over to the File option, Options at the bottom, Customize Ribbon, and then just check the radio button here for the developer. Click OK, and you'll have the Developer tab just on the ribbon. Click into there, and by default we are entered into design mode. From here, what we're going to want to do is just hop over to the Insert button, choose the drop down. I usually prefer to use ActiveX controls rather than form controls. They work slightly differently. For example, this button from the form controls basically creates a macro straight away, which I don't necessarily want, so I'm just going to delete that. What I prefer to use is the ActiveX controls because it lets you draw the button and then double click to drive straight into the code. So that's what we're going to use. We can right click on that button, go down to CommandButton object, click edit. This lets you edit the text of that particular button. So we'll call it submit data, and just press or click off of that. Okay, so that's our first button set up. There's a few other things that we can do with this particular button. We can go to the format control, and what we want to do is lock the aspect ratio, which means as we change the height and width of rows and columns, we do not change the aspect ratio of our button. It will not move with them in that sense. The other part to this is just hit in properties and do not move or size with cells. And then you have the option whether or not you'd like to print the object or not. Generally, we don't print the buttons. Click OK. So that's our button all ready to go there. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to need to do is actually set up our form. So we'll jump over to Visual Basic on the top left here, and we'll go to Insert User Form. And this gives us a blank canvas to start. Okay, so we have our controls, our user form. Now what we can do is we can give this a unique name just down here. So by default it will be called user form 1, and we're just going to say user data. That'll do. Okay, so that's our form. We'll press enter on that. Now we can also change the text at the top of our form, and that option is, if I just expand this, just here. So the caption, we will say that, actually let's just do that in caps, that office guy. Okay, so now this has got a title to our form. We've named our form as well. Next thing that we're going to want to do is actually add some drop-down menus. So from our controls, we have various different things. We can select objects, which is our current pointer tool that we have. We can add labels, text boxes, combo boxes, list boxes, check boxes, radio, option buttons, toggle buttons, frames, command buttons, tab strips, multi-pages, scroll bar, spin button, add an image, and then unknown. For this menu, drop-down menu that we're looking for, we want to use the combo box. So we'll click that, and then we can just drag and create a box. Now by default, there's nothing in here, which is fine. Now, in order to link this data to our Excel spreadsheet, this menu to our Excel spreadsheet, we're just going to hop back over to our Excel. Now, you want to set up a lookups tab that has your data that you want to actually include in your drop-down menus, in a similar way that you would use your data verification option here, and you would choose a list, and then your source is this, right? It works in exactly the same way, except we're within the form in Visual Basic. We now need to tell that form what range to actually bring in, and the easiest way to do that is to actually select all of this data and actually give it a name, give that range a name. So I'm going to call this one departments. Just press enter. Now this is called departments, and we'll call this one manager, and press enter. Now if we hop back over to our Visual Basic, with those named ranges, we can now link this drop-down menu directly to that data. So with the combo box selected, we're going to just scroll down this list. Now we are in the alphabetical order. You could also just select categorization, but we're just going to leave it in alphabetical. What we're looking for is one called row source. So as we scroll down, we'll find row source just here. We type in the name of the range that we defined earlier. So in this case, we'll call it departments. Press enter. Now, if we just hop over to our drop down, we can just toggle it, and we have our options there. Now, the other thing that you can do here is actually set a predefined value that when the form loads, it will always default to. So straight out of the box, it will be blank. However, we could always have it defining buying as the department. So every time the form loads, by default, it's buying. Or we can change it to any of the other options. If we want it blank, we would just delete that out and leave it blank. Now, the other things that you can do with this form is change the name. So we can just call it department as a name. And we can mess around with a few other things, such as background colors, border colors, even the font size, type, color, etc. So we can just click into font here, click the 3 dots there, and now let's just create it and say we want size 20, we want it bold, Times New Roman is fine. Press enter on that, and now we have quite large fonts for our departments. Now we can just copy this and paste it in, keeping all the formatting how we would like it, and then just drop right back down into our combo box. So this one's called department, this one is called just combo box 1. So we're going to want to change that to manager. Press enter. So now we have one called department, one called manager. In the manager one, obviously we need to change the row source, so we can just scroll right back down, find row source, and change this from departments to manager. And by selecting into that drop down, we can now see each different drop down working. Okay, so we have managers and we now have departments. Okay, so that's your first part of creating the form. There are a few other things that you can do to obviously dress this up a little bit. So we can add an image if we want, so we can just pop an image in that top corner there. With the main form selected, we can choose a background color. Personally, I prefer white, like this. Obviously we could drop an image in there if I had one. Next thing that you might want to do is add headers and various things like that. So we can just select a label, drop that in up here, and type a header. Like so, and just like the other forms, we can go down here, find the font, and edit this accordingly, right? So we can get 20, we can make it bold, and we'll just leave it there like that. We can obviously do other things like underline it, strike it through, and whatnot. We can also change the font color. And you have various different options here, so I can go red, for example, like so. Okay, so now we have a logo, we have some header text, we have our two drop-down menus. We need to have a text input field, I believe, so we we'll probably want to use the text box function. So we're going to drag that over here, and we're going to call this one first name, all one word. Right, we're going to want to just change those fonts again, make sure everything is the same. So we'll go for font 20, we'll do it regular, and Times New Roman. Okay, now we have a text box called first name. What we'll do is, with it selected, copy that box and paste it, and we'll just drop that there. This time we're going to call it last name. Okay, so if we just hop back to our Excel and our form data, what we're after is a first name, last name, department, and the line manager. Okay, so far our form has a first name, a last name, a department, and a manager, which is what we're looking for. The next thing is we need a submit button. Okay, so we are going to want to find our command button function, this one just here from our toolbox. We'll click that, and then we'll just drag a small command button just at the bottom here. From here we'll right click. Actually no, we won't need to. So in VBA we don't need to right click to do the edit. What we can do is we can just highlight the text and type submit directly onto that. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to need to do is actually create a piece of code in our submit button that then sends all this data back into Excel. Now, to save some time, I've actually just kind of rewritten one here. So let me just copy this. Let me then drop that out. Right. So what we'll do is you double click your submit button. That opens up your command button click function, or your module. So basically it's for command button 1, when you click that button you need to do something. So I'm going to just paste this in and then walk you through everything there is to kind of go through here. The first thing that you'll notice is it's private sub. So a subroutine that is specific to this workbook. So you couldn't execute this subroutine from another workbook. If you wanted to, you could then make this public sub rather than a private sub. So if your forms were held in a different workbook than your code and so forth, then you would have it as a public subroutine, but by default it will be a private subroutine. The next line is telling VBA and Excel that we want to create a piece of text and treat it as a range. Okay, in order to do that, we type dim what that text is, and then we're saying it's going to be treated as a range. The next line is setting that piece of text and creating a value for it, right? So we're saying take our first name and make its value the cells within the active sheet, count all of the rows from the bottom up, and then offset by 1. Okay, and basically what that is doing is giving us our next available row in our data. So if I just hop back to here, it should return A3, the next available slot to insert the data. So it will go right to the very bottom and X amount of million rows, and count all the way up until it finds that value, and then it will offset it by 1. Okay, so it will go all the way up and then offset it by 1 down to A3. Then all I've done is created the 4 parts that we're going to then pass over into the Excel document. So each one is the piece of text that we defined here, and then we're offsetting the columns by 1 column, 2 columns, or 3 columns. And the first one is column A, column B, column C, and column D. Okay, so the offset, it's offsetting against the first. So 1 is not column 1, it's column 2 effectively, or column B, then column C, and column D. I've just left these as quotations, and what we're going to do is actually add the values of what we called each of these, right? So the first one we called first name, right? So what we need to do is type in first name dot text. So what that's going to do is I'm going to have to rename that, because obviously let's just rename this column ref. Okay, so what we do, that's our column reference, and I'm just going to replace these. The reason for this is we're going to have a conflict if the names all match and are the same, right? So we want to make sure we have unique naming conventions going on and all the way through the code. Otherwise, if the first name equals the first name's text, you're only going to end up with the incorrect data, right? So the first name dot text now references the first text box that we have in our form and not the dim first name as range. So column reference now is the one that we're going to use throughout. I'm just going to remove that E. And then so the first name dot text. And that's going to be obviously our first name. The next part is last name dot text. Then we had department dot text, and then we had manager dot text. Okay. There are different ways of doing this. You could have dot value rather than dot text, but I tend to lean more on using text rather than value, but it really does depend on the type of information that you're trying to pass from your form into Excel. If it's number-based, you go ahead and use value. If it's text-based stuff, then use the text. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is auto-fit our columns, and then we're going to close the user input form. With that done, we can now just close that, and there's our data capture form all completed. Now, the other thing that we're going to need to do is now load this form from our button that we created in our Excel document. So remember how we changed the name of the form, so it's user data is what we've called it right here. We can copy that name, jump back to our Excel document, and in our submit data button that we created at the beginning, we'll open that up. It should be blank, I just had that dummy code in there. What we're going to want to do is actually type in the name of the form and then .show. And what that'll do is that'll open up the form ready for data capture. Okay, with all that done, we can close VBA out completely, go to the developer tab, and then deactivate design mode. Okay, now this button, we can click it and we get our user form popping up. We can then enter some names here, so we'll go with Catherine Regan, and then we can add a department. We'll go buying, and let's say Stephen. We'll submit our data, and there you go. Our data has passed through to Excel, populated each of the fields, and closed our submit button. We can obviously do this multiple times. Testing 1, 2, 3, and we can go for the accounts department, Helen, and there we go. Now you can see here that with that .text, we were able to pass through both text-based values as well as numerical values, and that's the main reason that I tend to lean more on using .text rather than .value. But with that being said, you know, generally, however you have your worksheet set up and what data you're trying to pass through from your forms to Excel will really determine how you want to have that actually set up. And that's it, guys. That's pretty much how you would set up a form, set up your drop-down menus, and pass all that data back into your Excel sheet. There are various other things that we could go into and various other tips, such as hiding Excel completely from view, and only showing your forms. You could have multiple forms, multiple drop downs feeding from each other, and so forth. And if any of those things are of interest, then drop down some comments down below, and I will probably create a video showing you a bit more of the in-depth ways of working with forms. But hopefully you guys found this useful. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Cheers.